Wealthy family cut ties with me for marrying my wife, but a year later, her business thrives and now they're seeking our help as their own business is failing. Growing up, my world revolved around business and wealth. As the eldest son of a family whose empire had thrived for generations, I was born into a life of privilege and expectations. My father had always made it clear that I was to follow a specific path, one paved with strategic marriages, influential connections, and the relentless pursuit of more success. To him, marriage was less about love and more about merging assets and expanding our influence. But things took an unexpected turn when I met Evie. It was at a modest business seminar, far from the lavish networking events I usually attended. Evie stood out from the crowd. She was there to pitch her sustainable fashion startup, a brand focused on ethical production and eco-friendly materials. I was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her fiery ambition and commitment to a cause she believed in. Unlike the polished airs my parents tried to set me up with, Evie was refreshingly real. She talked about her struggles, the late nights spent sewing samples herself, and the personal sacrifices she was willing to make to build her brand from scratch. It was both impressive and inspiring. When I introduced Evie to my parents, I naively hoped they'd see what I saw in her, a smart, driven entrepreneur who was making it on her own. Initially, they were polite, but the chill in the room was unmistakable. My mother, never one to mince words, made her feelings known during a private conversation that night. "She's not one of us," she said, her tone cold and dismissive. "She won't understand our lifestyle." I was furious. Evie's background doesn't matter, I argued. She's building her own success, and she's doing it with integrity. But my words fell on deaf ears. My father, a man of few but firm words, laid down the ultimatum a few days later. "If you marry her, you're on your own," he declared, his voice devoid of emotion. I thought he was bluffing. After all, my parents had always had the final say in my life, but they'd never fully abandoned me before. But when I proposed to Evie, they proved their seriousness. I was cut off, no financial support, no inheritance, no access to the family business. Sitting with Evie in our tiny, barely furnished apartment that night, I felt the weight of my family's decision settle on my shoulders. We were eating ramen, an ironic reminder of how far I'd fallen from luxury. Evie looked at me with a mixture of concern and love. "Are you really sure about this?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I took her hand, my heart filled with certainty. "Absolutely," I assured her, holding her gaze. "You're my choice, Evie. I'd rather build something real with you than live a fake life with them." And that's exactly what we set out to do. We had nothing but Evie's vision, a small savings account, and my willingness to do whatever it took to support her. It wasn't the life I'd been groomed for, but it was a life we chose together, one built on love, ambition, and most importantly, authenticity. With no safety net, we were in uncharted territory. But I felt a strange sense of freedom, too. I wasn't living under the suffocating weight of my family's expectations anymore. I was free to support Evie's dream, and she was free to be herself, without the constant judgment that came with being not one of us. The road ahead looked daunting, but I knew that with Evie by my side, it was worth every challenge we'd face. We were determined to prove that we could make it, together and on our own terms. The first few months after my family disowned me were a brutal reality check. I had gone from having unlimited access to resources, luxury, and a support system to barely scraping by in a cramped apartment. Evie and I were suddenly thrown into survival mode, and it was jarring. Evie's startup, which she had named EcoTrend, was still more of a vision than a business. It had a basic website, a few sample designs, and a small following on social media. We had no major funding, no brand recognition, and certainly no safety net. I took on a series of odd jobs to help keep the lights on. I woke up at 4 a.m. to work the morning shift as a barista at a nearby cafe. By noon, I was delivering packages around the city on my beat-up bicycle. By night, I was helping Evie with her business, doing everything from packing orders to drafting emails to potential suppliers. Evie, meanwhile, was relentless. She'd spend hours hunched over her laptop, researching sustainable suppliers, refining her designs, and developing marketing strategies on a shoestring budget. It wasn't glamorous work, but Evie was laser-focused. Some nights, I'd catch her crying from sheer exhaustion, and I'd wrap my arms around her, trying to offer comfort. "It's going to be worth it," I'd whisper, even when I wasn't entirely sure myself. There were nights when we fought, the stress of our situation manifesting as anger over the smallest things: an unpaid bill, a delayed shipment, or just the general uncertainty of whether we'd make rent that month. We had doubts, too, especially about whether we'd made the right decision to walk away from my family's wealth. Did we really need to go this hard? Evie asked me one night, tears welling up. I took her hand, even though my own resolve felt shaky. Yes, we did, I assured her. Because this is ours. No strings attached, no conditions. I'm in it. Every struggle felt like a step towards something real, something we were building with our own hands. Then, after months of relentless hustle, we caught a break. A local fashion magazine, known for highlighting up-and-coming talent, featured Evie's designs in a special segment on sustainable brands. I remember the moment we got the call. It was late afternoon, and I was unloading boxes from a delivery van. My phone rang, and it was Evie, practically screaming with excitement. "They want to feature eco-trend," she shouted. I could hear the tears in her voice, this time from joy. The magazine described Evie's designs as the next big thing in sustainable fashion. The exposure was like a spark in the dark. Orders began to pour in, and we were suddenly struggling to keep up, but in the best way possible. Evie's phone buzzed constantly with inquiries from boutique owners, influencers, and even a few larger retailers interested in carrying her line. It was overwhelming, but it was exactly what we'd been working toward. We celebrated that night with a cheap bottle of wine and takeout from the Thai place around the corner. We sat on the floor of our living room, surrounded by boxes of fabric samples, order receipts, and Evie's sketches taped to the walls. "I told you we'd make it," Evie said, her eyes glowing with a mix of exhaustion and happiness. And this is only the beginning. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, not just for her, but for both of us. We were proving everyone wrong, including my family. I knew they probably had no idea what we were up to, and I didn't care. This wasn't about revenge or validation. It was about building something real from nothing, with nothing but our grit and determination. But it wasn't just about the business. Evie and I were growing stronger as a couple. The adversity had become a kind of glue, binding us together in a way I hadn't expected. Every late-night brainstorming session, every shared moment of uncertainty, had deepened our bond. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving, and doing it together. As the weeks went by, eco-trend kept gaining momentum. We hired a part-time seamstress to keep up with demand and moved production from our apartment to a small shared workspace. The challenges kept coming: difficult clients, shipping mishaps, and the ever-present fear of failure. But we had something that couldn't be taken away: our belief in each other and in what we were building. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. We were no longer just fighting to survive. We were carving out our place in the world, one stitch and one order at a time. We had started from scratch, but we were making something real, together. It was a Friday afternoon, and Evie was in the middle of finalizing a deal with a major boutique chain when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was my mother. I hadn't heard from her in nearly a year. Not since the day she told me I was cut off for good. I picked up, my heart pounding with a mix of anger, confusion, and a tiny flicker of hope I couldn't suppress. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Hello, William," she replied, her voice soft, almost hesitant. It was strange hearing her use my full name. It felt too formal for the moment. "I think it's time we talk," she continued, her tone carrying an unusual gentleness. "And I'd like to meet Evie, too." I didn't know how to respond. This was the moment I'd secretly imagined over and over. My family wanting to reconnect, to make amends. But I was wary. Why now? Why reach out after a year of silence? Just as Evie's business was finally hitting its stride. Evie was sitting at the kitchen table, sketching new designs when I hung up the phone. "My mom wants to meet," I said, the words feeling surreal. Evie's eyes widened. "Really?" she asked, her face a mix of surprise and cautious optimism. "Maybe they want to make things right," she added, always the optimist. I wasn't as sure, but Evie convinced me to go. "What's the worst that could happen?" she said. I didn't want to dampen her hope, even though a part of me was screaming that this was too good to be true. We met at a high-end cafe downtown, the kind I used to frequent when my family's wealth was still at my disposal. My mother was already seated when we arrived, looking perfectly polished in her designer coat and signature pearls. She stood up as we approached, greeting us with a warm smile that felt oddly genuine. "Evie, it's lovely to finally meet you," she said, extending her hand. Evie, trying to stay composed, shook her hand and managed a polite smile. The initial conversation was awkward but cordial. My mother made small talk, complimenting Evie's recent success. "I've heard a lot about eco-trend," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. You've really built something remarkable. Evie's eyes lit up, clearly hopeful that this was the beginning of a sincere reconciliation. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but sincere. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was a genuine attempt to mend what had been broken. But then, the tone of the conversation shifted. My mother's gaze turned serious, her fingers nervously fidgeting with her pearl necklace. I won't beat around the bush, she said. Your father's business has been struggling lately. We've been hit hard by the competition, and frankly, we could use some guidance. She paused, looking directly at Evie. Your expertise could really help us turn things around. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about rebuilding our family bond. It was about using Evie's success to save their failing business. The flicker of hope I'd felt earlier was quickly snuffed out by a surge of anger. Evie's face fell. I could see the disappointment and hurt in her eyes, a mix of sadness and disbelief. She had come expecting an apology, or at least an acknowledgement of past mistakes. Instead, it was just another transaction, another favor to be requested without any genuine remorse for the way they had treated us. So, this meeting isn't really about us, I said, my voice cold and cutting. It's about the business. My mother seemed momentarily taken aback by my bluntness. It's about both, she tried to insist. We do want to reconcile, William. But yes, the business is part of it. We can't ignore that reality. Unbelievable, Evie muttered under her breath, but loud enough for my mother to hear. I reached for her hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I think we're done here, I said, rising from my chair. I was tired of the charades, the manipulation, and the constant reminders that I was only valuable to them as an asset, not as a son. Evie stood up too, her disappointment evident. I had hoped this was a real attempt to mend things, she said, her voice calm but firm. But clearly, it's just about saving your business. My mother's face softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine regret in her eyes. It's not just that, she insisted. We do care about you both. But the business, it's everything to us. And Evie is everything to me, I replied, my voice steady. We're not here to fix your mistakes. We left the cafe without looking back, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on both of us. As we stepped outside, Evie turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I really wanted this to be different, she whispered. I know, I said, pulling her into a hug, but at least we know where we stand now. We walked home in silence, our hearts heavier than when we'd arrived. I had hoped for reconciliation, for a chance to rebuild bridges. But instead, we were reminded of why we had left in the first place. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test our resolve and our commitment to each other, but also one that made us even more determined to succeed, not to prove my family wrong, but to prove ourselves right. We left the cafe in a tense silence, my mind still reeling from the unexpected turn of events. As we walked home, I felt a storm brewing inside me. Anger, disappointment, and a deep sense of betrayal. I had hoped, despite my better judgment, that this meeting was about healing old wounds. But it was just about saving their crumbling empire, and that stung more than I could admit. The moment we stepped inside our apartment, I couldn't hold it in anymore. They're only interested in us because they're desperate, I shouted, pacing the small living room. This has nothing to do with wanting us back, Evie. It's not about you, it's about what you can do for them. The words came out harsh, but they were the truth. I felt a mix of rage and helplessness. Rage at their audacity and helplessness at how easily they could still hurt us. Evie sat down on the couch, quieter than usual, her expression one of disappointment mixed with resignation. I know, she finally said, her voice soft but steady. I wanted to believe they'd changed. I thought maybe they'd come around, even a little, but I guess I was wrong. I sank down next to her, my anger momentarily giving way to sadness. I'm sorry, I said, reaching for her hand. I dragged you into this mess, and now they're trying to use you to fix it. Evie squeezed my hand, her eyes meeting mine. You didn't drag me into anything. I chose this, she said, and we've built something good on our own terms. I won't let them take that away from us. We spent the rest of the night discussing our options, but it didn't take long to reach a decision. We're not their backup plan, Evie declared, and I wholeheartedly agreed. We decided to respond with a firm, unapologetic no. It wasn't just about protecting Evie's business. It was about standing our ground. The next morning, I called my mother. The phone rang a few times before she picked up, her voice sounding tense, almost expectant. William, she said, trying to sound casual, but there was an edge to her tone. We've made our decision, I said, getting straight to the point. We're not interested in helping with the business. Evie and I have worked too hard to be dragged into your crisis, especially after everything you put us through. My mother was silent for a moment. Then she spoke with an air of forced calmness. You're letting pride get in the way, she snapped. This isn't just about you. This is about the family legacy. You can help save it. I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my voice steady. It's not pride, Mom. It's about integrity. You disowned me for choosing Evie, and now you're asking for her help. It doesn't work that way. If you want our support, you have to earn our trust first. Her tone turned cold. You're making a mistake, William, she warned. We're still your family. You owe us that much. I clenched my jaw, feeling the familiar guilt creeping in, but I pushed it aside. I don't owe you anything, I said firmly. Evie and I have built our own life, and that's where my loyalty lies now. My mother's response was sharp and bitter. You're going to regret this, she said, her voice low and filled with frustration. You're letting a personal grudge ruin everything we built. No, Mom, I replied. You ruined it when you chose money and control over family. You don't get to rewrite history just because things aren't going your way now. With that, I ended the call, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I had always wanted my family's acceptance, even if I hated to admit it. But this wasn't the kind of acceptance I could live with. It wasn't genuine, it was transactional, just like everything else had been with them. I turned to Evie, who was sitting on the couch, watching me with a concerned expression. How did it go? She asked quietly. It's done, I said, sitting down beside her. They're not happy, but it needed to be said. Evie nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the moment. You did the right thing, she assured me. We have to protect what we've built. As the days passed, we received more messages from my family, some pleading, some accusatory. My father even tried to reach out, but I ignored the calls. The desperation in their voices was clear, but so was the fact that their intentions hadn't changed. It was still about what they needed, not about reconciliation. Evie and I focused on moving forward. We had big plans for EcoTrend, a new line of products, partnerships with more ethical suppliers, and even the possibility of opening our own retail space. The confrontation with my family was painful, but it had also clarified something important. We were no longer living under their shadow. We were carving our own path, and it felt liberating. One night, as we sat on the balcony of our apartment, looking out over the city, Evie leaned her head on my shoulder. Do you think they'll ever really change? She asked softly. I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. I don't know, I admitted. But we don't need them to. We've made it this far without them. Evie smiled, a quiet but determined smile. And we'll keep going. And in that moment, I knew we would. We had faced the confrontation, and we had come out stronger, together. The fallout from our refusal was immediate and ruthless. I'd expected my family to be angry, but I wasn't prepared for the full-on smear campaign they unleashed. Within a week, whispers about Evie and me started circulating in our old social circles. The rumors were absurd, but also infuriatingly specific, that I had stolen trade secrets from my family to fuel Evie's business, and that she was nothing more than a manipulative gold digger who had seduced me away from my family's empire. Hearing this hurt, not just because it was a blatant lie, but because it was coming from people who had once been close to me, my parents, my cousins, even my childhood friends. These were the same people who had watched me grow up, who had once celebrated my achievements, and now they were turning on me to protect the family's reputation. Evie was devastated. I never imagined it would get this ugly. She confessed one night as we sat on our tiny balcony, looking out over the city. Her eyes were filled with hurt, and I could see the exhaustion of battling not just business challenges, but now a deeply personal attack. All I wanted was to build something good, Will. I took her hand, feeling the weight of everything we were up against. We knew they might fight dirty, I said, my voice firm but weary. But they won't win. We've built this from scratch, and we have the truth on our side. And that's exactly what we decided to do. Fight back with the truth. We issued a public statement, laying out the origins of EcoTrend and detailing how every design, partnership, and strategy was entirely Evie's own work. We shared Evie's journey from her early days, highlighting the struggles we'd faced together and emphasizing that my family had had no involvement in the business. The response was overwhelming. Support poured in from unexpected places. Industry insiders, loyal customers, and even a few former business associates who respected Evie's commitment to ethical practices. People admired Evie's resilience and integrity. It was a stark contrast to my family's increasingly desperate attempts to discredit her. But the damage my family tried to cause wasn't just limited to gossip. My father made a public statement implying that I had betrayed the family business, trying to frame our refusal as an act of disloyalty. He even hinted that I had left the family to pursue my own gain, conveniently omitting the fact that they had disowned me in the first place. At one point, they even tried legal action, claiming I'd used insider knowledge from my upbringing to boost Evie's brand. It was laughable, but also draining. We had to hire lawyers, gather evidence, and spend weeks proving that our business was completely independent. Through it all, Evie stood strong. She faced every interview, every skeptical question with grace and honesty. "This business is my own," she declared in one particularly heated interview. "It was built from the ground up, with no help from anyone except my husband's support." Her words rang true, and people began to see my family's desperation for what it was, an attempt to salvage a crumbling reputation by any means necessary. As the months passed, the truth prevailed. The public saw through the lies, and my family's attempts to undermine us backfired spectacularly. Industry magazines began featuring EcoTrend as a story of perseverance, and Evie's reputation as a resilient and genuine entrepreneur grew even stronger. We secured new partnerships with major brands, and plans for our first brick-and-mortar store were set into motion. Despite the success, there was a lingering sadness, an emptiness that couldn't be filled by sales or accolades. It was the quiet moments that got to me, like seeing an old family photo on social media or hearing about a distant cousin's wedding I wasn't invited to. It wasn't the lack of wealth or status that hurt. It was the loss of what could have been if my family had chosen love over control, reconciliation over retribution. Evie sensed it too. One night, after a long day of planning the store's opening, she found me staring out the window, lost in thought. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked gently. "Every day," I admitted, "but not the part about choosing you." "Never that." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I wish they could see how happy we are. Maybe then they'd understand." "Maybe," I said, wrapping my arm around her. "But if they can't, that's their loss, not ours." We fell into a comfortable silence, one born of shared battles and earned victories. We had fought hard for everything we had, and we weren't about to let anyone take it away. The fallout had tested us, but it had also forged us into something unbreakable. And as we continued to build our lives together, we found that, even with the lingering sadness of what could have been, we had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that we could face anything as long as we faced it together. As Evie and I prepared for the arrival of our first child, life felt both surreal and deeply fulfilling. Our small apartment, which had once been filled with boxes of fabric and design sketches, was now transforming into a cozy, welcoming home for our growing family. We painted the nursery a soft shade of yellow, filled the shelves with children's books, and debated baby names over breakfast. The anticipation of becoming parents was filled with a sense of purpose that transcended all the chaos we'd faced in the past year. Evie's business was thriving, with the opening of EcoTrend's first retail store just around the corner. She designed a beautiful, minimalist space that reflected her brand's ethos: sustainability, authenticity, and a focus on quality over quantity. I watched as she navigated everything, from hiring staff to finalizing the store's layout, all while managing pregnancy cravings and fatigue with grace. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Evie rubbing her growing belly absent-mindedly, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think our child will ever meet your family?" she asked softly. The question hung in the air for a moment. I hadn't allowed myself to think about it, but now that we were so close to welcoming a baby, it was hard to ignore. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I hope so if it's on the right terms. I won't let them use our child the way they tried to use us." Evie nodded, understanding without judgment. "I agree," she said. "I want our baby to know love, not conditions." In the middle of this new chapter, I received another unexpected call from my mother. Her voice, once sharp and filled with authority, now sounded tired, almost defeated. "William," she began, her tone different from the last time we spoke. "I just want to check on you. I heard you're expecting a child." I was caught off guard. Despite everything, there was a part of me that felt a faint flicker of hope. "Yes," I said simply, unsure of where this conversation was heading. She hesitated, and then her voice softened in a way I hadn't heard in years. "I wish things had been different," she said quietly. There was a weight to her words that felt real, and for once, I didn't respond with anger or defensiveness. "Me too," I replied, and this time, I meant it. It wasn't just a line. It was a genuine acknowledgement of what could have been, of the love that had been lost along the way. But that brief moment of reconciliation, as genuine as it was, didn't change our reality. I knew better than to expect a fairy tale reunion, and I was no longer seeking my family's validation. Instead, I felt a profound sense of closure. I had come to terms with the fact that real support and loyalty come from the family you create, not necessarily the one you're born into. Evie, who had heard only my side of the conversation, looked at me curiously when I hung up. "What did she say?" she asked, her voice cautious. "She wishes things had been different," I said, my voice steady but tinged with a trace of sadness. "And so do I. But I don't think it changes much." Evie reached over and took my hand. "It doesn't have to," she reassured me. "We've already built our own family, Will." And she was right. Our journey had been anything but conventional, filled with challenges that had tested our resolve. But it had also taught us to find strength in each other and to trust that we could create something lasting, even without the support of my birth family. As we neared the due date, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led us to this moment. We'd built something real, not based on inherited wealth or family politics, but on genuine love, hard work, and shared dreams. The success of EcoTrend felt like more than just a business victory. It was a symbol of resilience, of everything we'd overcome together. One morning, as I was putting the finishing touches on the crib, Evie suddenly gasped. I turned to see her clutching her belly, her face a mixture of surprise and excitement. "I think it's time," she said, a hint of panic in her voice. I grabbed the hospital bag and rushed her to the car, my heart racing with both anxiety and anticipation. As we drove to the hospital, Evie gripped my hand tightly, and despite the chaos, we both couldn't stop smiling. Hours later, as I held our newborn baby for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This tiny life was a new beginning, a symbol of hope and a reminder of the family we were building on our own terms. Evie, exhausted but glowing with happiness, looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "Yes, we did," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And we'll keep doing it together." As I cradled our child in my arms, I realized that everything we'd faced, every battle fought, had led us to this moment. It wasn't about the wealth we'd lost or the family ties that had frayed. It was about the love and life we were creating, one that was honest, strong, and entirely our own. I no longer felt the need for validation from those who had turned their backs on us. I had everything I needed right here: Evie, our baby, and the family we'd built from the ground up. And as I looked into my child's eyes, I knew we were ready for whatever came next together.